in life. We want to help people, and if we can say the right thing, or we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, so we don't say anything at all. We don't have scales for grief. I didn't cry when my dad died, but I can't stop crying because my dogs died. Just because someone doesn't cry doesn't mean they're not grieving. Sometimes they're afraid to cry in case they cannot stop. There's no heart as whole as a broken heart. Only a broken heart will let in the light. To be born means we grieve. We can't go through life without grieving. You are changed as every grief changes one. You are not the same person.
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
Today I'm speaking with Barbara Allen. Barbara has helped develop Australia's first animal chaplaincy program at the Lort Smith Animal Hospital here in Melbourne. She is passionate about animals and about stewardship of all creation and is the author of numerous books including I Was There, Pigeon, Animals in Religion and Pelican. Allen serves as an ordained minister in the Uniting Church in Australia and in a voluntary capacity as the grief support person for Story Dogs, a charity that uses dogs to help children become confident readers. Barbara lives in Melbourne in Australia, and I am so excited to speak with you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too, Barbara. Now, I was provided with your details, or actually it was the other way around, wasn't it? You were provided with my details after I had interviewed the wonderful author Leah Kaminsky late last year. And I am absolutely in love with the book that you have just released. Can you tell us a little bit about that book, please, Barbara?
It's a book about pet loss, and I wrote it because I felt that our society, as you well know, Catherine, doesn't deal with death very well, for human loss or for animal loss. And I just felt there are a lot of broken hearts out there who could do with some of the tools of the trade, or for people who perhaps don't have pets but they know someone whose pet has died. They don't know what to say, they don't know how to help. So being able to give them a way to help someone who's in pain. And I think we want to do that, don't we, in life? We want to help people, and if we can say the right thing, or we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, so we don't say anything at all, whereas this gives a few little pointers to help people, I hope. Those who are grieving and those who want to help those who are grieving. And so many people love their animals and sometimes get a shock when they experience the amount of pain when an animal has died, and to let them know that that's normal. That's one of the main reasons I wrote the book, to normalise the grief.
And what surprises me is that for some people it comes as a shock when they experience this grief, because the reason why I say it surprises me is because our pets love us unconditionally. Like, they're the one thing in the world that no matter how bad we are or what we're looking like or what bad day we've had, the pets are always the one. Like, I take my dog, for example. She's always the one that is the happiest person in the family to see me.
Yes.
And so I'm surprised when people are shocked when they have a pet die. They are surprised by the impact that has on them.
Part of that reason, I think, is, like you, I was surprised because I grew up with animals, always had animals in my life. Can't imagine life without animals. They're just part of it. And I used to say to people, if you're watching TV and you leave the room and you go back in 10 minutes, who notices? It's a dog or the cat. Maybe not the partner.
So true.
It's true. And I say, be more like your dog, embrace the present moment, love unconditionally. And our dogs and our cats, our animals get the essence of who we are, not the external trappings. They get right to the heart of things. And that is, I think, one of the reasons that grief is so intense. We're not expecting that. They are our best cheerleaders. Partners try, but I really do think the animals, they don't have baggage. They don't have baggage about us. And I think that's why it's a very raw and a very unburdened grief. I think part of the reason people are surprised is because of perhaps mixed messages in society. They'll hear things like, it was only a dog, you can get another one. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, but I don't think people say that about husband. If it's just a husband, get another one. I don't think we normally hear that. So it almost says that grief is not worth, it's not the same. Now, I don't have one, and I'm sure you don't have one. We don't have scales for grief. We don't say, well, we have this much grief for a partner, we have this much for a mother, we have this much for a dog. Grief is grief, and it's about the bond, it's about the love. It's not about the species. So it's about the attachment, the amount of love, and it doesn't matter whether that's 4 legs, wings, scales, or 2 legs. It's about the bond. And as we have so much love in the world, it doesn't mean that we're not loving others. It's just one of the mixes in our family and our companions. So I think it's because people think that you're not meant to feel that for an animal. I think if that's how that person feels, that they've never really had that love. And some people have never had animals. So I say just take a step back and think for them that it's another language, or it's like an alien's landed from another planet. They don't really understand, but hopefully the book or someone giving them some ideas will help them not say the wrong thing or be able to help someone who's grieving, even if they will never understand that. But I think it's that idea, because people are still quite apologetic. They'll say to me, or they used to say to me, "Oh, I didn't know I'd feel like this. I didn't cry when my dad died, but I can't stop crying because my dog's died." And they feel guilty. And I say, it's not about guilt, it's about honouring that grief. And every grief is different, and everyone in the family will experience that grief differently. So it's about how you're feeling and the memories and the space, because when you walk into the door, through the door at night, that was your dog's space, that was your
Mm.
cat's space. So there are the reminders everywhere, and even though you might still be vacuuming a month later, you still get that tuft of fur somewhere, or so it's all of that. And what do you do with their feeding bowls and the collars and the rugs and all of that? So it's your living area was their living area. So there's no displacement from that. You're always there. So that is also another part to that grief. But I do think it's been that idea for society. It's just a dog. It's not the same as a human. No, that grief is grief. And we don't play games in terms of this is more, this is less, this is whatever. It's about what that animal has meant to you.
It's interesting what you were saying there about when you walk in the door at night.
Mm,
The thing that I recall when our cat died, that we had been in our family for like 13 years,
mhm,
was I didn't think that she was that much of a personality or presence until she wasn't there. And then I
mhm,
realized how much we were just so used to her being always there. And it was so much in her absence that we realized how significant she was to our life. And I think that was also another element of the grieving process that we had to go through as well, is just those milestones. Like, I think a pet always sort of is part of your life for a long period of time, and that can be a transition from whether a child's growing up or
yeah.
whether it was, when, like, we got our cat when we were very young in our relationship, my husband and I, before we were husband and wife. And so there's those milestones that I think that our pets, or whatever term we would like to call them, companions, that they really mark that in life too.
Mhm.
Is that something that you've found?
Absolutely. And I just like your terming of companions versus pets. Some people will say you don't call them pets, but look, it's a term of endearment. We do that with our partners. So I don't mind that. I don't see it as diminishing the animal at all. Companion means from Latin to break bread. And I kind of like that. We share our meals at the same time as perhaps our animals. So either one, is fine by me. But it's that you're quite right about those transitional times and the marking of particular stage, especially with children. Sometimes you might acquire a pet when you think, I think our child is old enough to be gentle, to take on the responsibility, changing the water bowl, maybe going for a walk with us, all of those things, and going into school. And also our animals are really important when they're teenagers, because another great quality of our animals is they don't tell secrets. So sometimes, especially in the teenage years, the dog and the cat will have been told things that the parents haven't been told, and they keep those secrets, and they're ready for the hug all the time. So when the animal dies, it's often when the child's about to, grown up, about to perhaps leave or be in year 11 and 12. That's a really hard time, and it's hard when perhaps they're going off to university, they come home, their animal has died. So they're really crucial things. Or, as you said, beginning of a relationship. Sometimes if a partner has died and that pet has been part of that partner's life, then what happens when that pet dies later? It's another part of your partner who's died. So really crucial things, even simple things like Christmas. If you take a bit of a vote, find out how many, buy a present for their pets at Christmas, or the cat's been there helping you wrap the presents and, the ribbons, and they're there to see the paper being unwrapped. All of those things are part of that messy makeup of living together, and they've been part of that. Sometimes not, as you said, you're not particularly conscious because they're there all the time
Mm.
until there's the absence of presence. And that's when I say it's like almost that presence of absence. You do it back to front. They really feel that heaviness. Grief comes from a Latin word which means heavy and burdened, and that's how we feel. We do feel that heaviness, and being bereft, means being robbed, and we're robbed of our loved one, whether they've got fur or whether they've got two legs. So I think it's really important for us to also look at the families and recognise that people grieve differently, and just because someone doesn't cry doesn't mean they're not grieving. Sometimes they're afraid to cry in case they cannot stop. So if they push it down until they're on their own and be away from other people, they can deal with it their way. So I think it's important for us in a family to also recognise that. And some members may not want to talk about it, or you might think they're doing okay, but it may not be the case. So it's just recognising that messiness of a family can also mean you might have 3 or 4 different ways of dealing with grief. And I can just see your dog coming off the off the couch.
Yes, and I think that means that there's probably someone home. So bear with me, Barbara.
Yeah, I will bear with you.
That was so appropriately timed, wasn't it?
It was the messiness of life. And again, I suppose you could say our protectors of the household. I mean,
Yeah.
we rely on the dog and even the presence of a cat to keep us safe. And there's another layer that's gone, that we just take for granted. And we think, oh, yes.
It's so true. And I have so many questions to ask you, Barbara. But before I ask more about your work at the Lort Smith Animal Hospital, I'd love to know how you got started. Like, what made you fascinated? Because did you start off as an ordained minister first and then work with animals? Or how? Tell me your story, Barbara.
Well, I started off, well, I was a nurse first, then a teacher, but I've always grown up with animals, always loved animals. Would have been a vet, I think, except for maths and chemistry. Like you're there thinking, oh, I don't think so. And I'm actually really pleased because I would have been the wrong fit. I would have taken everything home. So I've always just sort of thought, well, I love animals and they'll always be part of my life. And then we were living in Canberra, and then we came down to Melbourne, and I was teaching at the theological college, and I was ordained by then. And then someone mentioned one lunchtime about being approached by the new CEO at Lort Smith Animal Hospital, who is Rick Holland, who is also an ordained minister. He came down one day from his office, and there was a lady in one of the waiting rooms who came out and collapsed from grief. And he thought, we can do better than this. We need to do better than this. So that it was his vision, really. And I want to, pay my respects. He died earlier in the year. So it was due to Rick Holland's vision. And then, we just ran with, I answered the ad and was interviewed, and, we just got on. And I just felt it was lovely because I had worked in aged care for a while as a chaplain. So for me, grief and loss, it was always something that interested me, and I felt drawn to. I felt that I had the gifts for that, and it didn't worry me sitting next to someone who was grieving or someone who was dying. I just felt that was a natural process of life. So to extend that with the human side in chaplaincy, but to have the bonus of being there with animals as well was a real plus. My late husband didn't actually, I mean, I did I did run it past him. I mean, I was going to go for the job anyway, but that wasn't the point. He said, yes, you can go if you don't take a handbag to work, meaning, that you don't put things in your handbag, take them home. He should have just said, don't come home with other animals. That would have been clearer, but he didn't. So I came home with lots. So I was there for 5.5 years. And so 1,500 people a year I would speak to about grief and loss.
Wow.
So, and writing the book, I mean, I include some of those reflections. I mean, they've changed them, but some of the letters from clients. And it was when I began, within the first week, I had someone ring me and say, their dog died 2 years ago. They haven't been able to talk to anyone about it because they're afraid of what people will say. And that's when I thought, wow, this is something that needs to be changed. And I feel very privileged that I was able to help that number of people every year. And with the book, hopefully, more people, and to break down some of those barriers and some of those stereotypes. And I think most people love their animals. I mean, I know that's not always the case, but, I like to think that most people do. And I think most animal lovers are lovely people. But it's that recognition that, we could do better. So I felt really privileged to have been there, helping with grief and loss, and then going on further and writing other books about animals because they're my love. And to me, they're part of our family, our furred brethren. I've always thought of them as, family. So whether it's our pets or our wild animals, how do we make it a better world for all of them? So, yeah. So I had fun.
It certainly sounds like you have. And what I love about your writing is the fact that you combined your compassion for animals with also amazing facts and historical information as well, which just provides such an interesting insight to the subject. And I'm not surprised that, given the role that you had at the Lort Smith Animal Hospital, when I think about when you go to a vet, it is a time where you're either, getting their vaccinations and their annual checkup, or if you've got something wrong and you've found that they've either have a lump or something like that. And at very few times at any other point in our lives do we get to make or are in a situation where we can decide to euthanize and go through that process. And I think it's really at that time when you have that relationship with a vet that you go through those conversations, because very rarely do we get that opportunity when we go through our natural life, that unless we have a life limiting illness, and now we obviously have voluntary assisted dying, which is a very different process and by no means euthanasia. But I do want to talk to you about just that element, because it is something that it seems to be very unique to being in a veterinarian environment, and how grief plays out around that decision making process when we have that decision.
And it's something that differs pet loss from human loss.
Yeah.
And we're often, as the carer, as the dog's owner or companion, we are there having to make that decision. And I always would say to clients, it's always with veterinary advice as well. You're not making it on your own, because it feels like we are. It feels like we're saying, and there's a lot of guilt attached to that. And that's part of one of the layers of the grief. If the animal has had to be euthanized, we can feel, oh, I should have left it another day. I should have made that decision in a week's time. Might have been all right. I was just emotional. All of those things can come back, and we relive and we relive, and we think we've made the wrong decision. So that is why I always say it's always with veterinary advice, because they will say, what needs to be done if an animal is suffering. And with your own animals, they hide their pain.
Mm.
And their disease processes are different from humans. So sometimes, I'd have people who'd go away maybe for 2 weeks on holiday, come back, their animal's really ill, and they feel guilty because they didn't know. Well, often there wouldn't have been anything they would have known, because the disease process is so different. So we can have that guilt as well, thinking, I should have picked this up, I should have done differently here. And also part of the messiness of it is perhaps what that animal has meant in that person's life. I had one person who was distraught that she was going to have to euthanize her animal because that dog had got her through her breast cancer. Had been on her bed, 24/7, helped her, been her support. But she said, I could not put my dog through that treatment. I could not put my dog through chemotherapy. When the dog can't understand why they're feeling sick or why this will happen, why that'll happen. She said, as a human, I knew and it was awful, but I couldn't put my dog through that. So we come with lots of guilt, lots of different layers. Nothing's just pure and simple. But I think it's that element of guilt with euthanasia, even though we know we can relieve that animal's suffering, it's never long enough. I mean, an animal's life is so short, and that's part of it. We don't do the maths, do we? Mathematics is not what we do when we take on a pet because we think, oh, I might get 12 years if I'm lucky, might get 15, 17 if you're really lucky. But you don't, and every year when you're perhaps having the vaccination, you look and you think, really? Oh, are they really that old now? Really?
Mm.
And that's really hard. Even thinking about COVID and the number of people who said they wouldn't have been able to really survive well mentally if they hadn't had a pet. So we look at how there've been such support, and hopefully through COVID, it did teach people the value of animals and just what wonderful companions they are. But again, when that support's gone, it's really hard. And if you've had to make that decision about life and death, and some people say, but I feel like I'm playing God in that. And I say, well, in that case, you hand that over to your vet. And I've always said to people, if you doubt it, you ring the vet the next day, have a talk. Did I do the right thing? Of course you did, but you need someone to reassure you on that. So that's pretty hard. And it's also, I mean, for me, I would make sure that clients had someone with them, if possible, or were there for maybe half an hour with a cup of tea before they drove home, because that's a really hard thing to expect someone to get in their car and drive home after that. And especially, and if it's been a shock, if they were not expecting that, and it's, this is the only situation. This is, the animal is in such agony due to something. We need to relieve the animal's suffering now. To drive home, that's a really big ask. So it's, to be able to give them some space and some time, or to get someone else to come in to take them home was really important. Yeah.
And how can we support someone who has lost a pet and it might be sudden or it might be have been expected? What are the sort of things that we can do to support someone in that situation?
Sometimes if you're not sure what to say, you don't have to say anything. If it's someone you can go and give them a hug, or you can buy a pet condolence card. Most newsagents have a pet condolence card, or you can make your own, or just take in a sorry card. It's not the time to weigh things up. It's not the time to slip into the, oh, it was just a dog, or you had the dog for 13 years, that was a good innings. That doesn't help. The same as if you said that about a human member of the family. Well, they were 80. That still doesn't make it any easier at all. Or that, oh, it's only a dog. I had people someone would say, oh, it was just a dog. What about the dying in India? I mean, there's no correlation. And then the person feels worse thinking, well, here I am getting upset about my dog and there are people dying around the world. But that shouldn't even come into that. As I said, it's like that weighing up the grief on the scales. You don't do that. So either you get it and you can go in and say, I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can do? And asking that question really is, I think, one of the most basic things. Is there anything I can do? And it might be, no, not yet, but maybe in a couple of days, I'd like to talk to you about this. Or would you come with me on my next walk? I still want to walk, but I don't feel up to it without a dog. Or, so you don't have to even get into a comparison with anything. It's saying, how can I help you? And especially for people who haven't had a pet, don't understand the depth of grief, even just saying, I'm sorry for your loss. Is there anything I can do? Is well and truly appreciated. Don't cross the street and say nothing is really what I'm saying.
That's so true, Barbara. And I think that point that you just raised in relation to if they'd had a pet that they would take for a walk on a regular basis,
Mm,
that's another habit that would actually be a
mm.
constant reminder. So that's a really lovely suggestion to ask whether you would like to, go on a walk with them. I think that that's a really beautiful suggestion. You talk about the idea of a shared heart. Can you take me through what that term means to you?
Well, for me, it's a shared heart of two different aspects. One is a shared heart with your animal, And I think for most of us, we feel that they're always in our hearts. And even thinking about walking our dogs when our dogs have died, I would still go for my walk without Rosa. And I think of her next to me. My spirit dog, she could go more quickly now because she was young again. So I would still do that, and sometimes I'd have tears running down my cheeks. And other dog owners, there's this shared community out there. You might not know the name of the person, but you probably know the name of their dog. So they would understand. If you're without the dog, they will often ask, you know, are you all right? How's your dog? So you end up with this relationship of people who you may not know, but they know your dog. And so there can be that support too. So what I'm saying here, I mean, I'm just cutting on a different thing, but don't rule out people that you would normally not have said many words to. They may understand you more than you think. So often nice little communities of dog walkers. And now I've forgotten what you asked me.
The shared heart.
The shared heart. So that shared heart with our animals, a shared heart with other people, a shared heart with creation, and that shared heart. I mean, it's interesting because the title of the book has shared heart in it, but the titles of the chapters have more heart. So I think it's more that sharing in that. So there's that shared heart with children, a shared heart with spiritual aspects and afterlife, a shared heart with grief. And for me, it's important with children, and I might just launch into that if that's okay, that sometimes people think, oh, having an animal with children means that once an animal has died, that will help them with human loss. And I kind of say, no, that's not why you have that's not why you have a pet. And I don't remember the loss of my animals helping me with the loss of my grandparents, for example, because each grief is different. It is difficult to talk about grief and loss with children, and at different ages, there are different at their different stages at what they will take on, what is too much for them at the time. But what I would really like to say here is don't lie to them. Don't say, oh, your dog went to live on a farm, or don't go and get a rabbit that looks the same as the one that died, because the children will pick it up eventually. That's not the same personality. And if you lie about that, what else will they think, are you going to lie to me about? So be honest. And if you find that you're crying a lot, just say, I'm sad too. And that's perfectly fine for them to see their parents crying. That's life. They're missing the dog, the cat, the fish, and to say part of our family. And we feel this differently. And that's a good opening for a conversation. And there are lots of beautiful children's books and picture books that can help with pet loss with children. So that's one of them, the shared heart, the shared family heart. The other thing I wanted to say about heart is that our hearts can break. I mean, this is about shattered hearts. And there's a saying that there's no heart as whole as a broken heart. Only a broken heart will let in the light. So you might have a perfect heart, unbroken, but it doesn't let in the light. Our hearts become mosaics in a sense. Got little bits of memories here, and hopefully other people. I like to think that people might have an afternoon tea and talk about their loss, and have maybe friends come and visit, and maybe a story that they tell will be part of that, another bit of the mosaic that goes into your heart. Oh, that story, didn't know that goes in there. And through that, you've got the light, and that light is made up from tears and love. That's kept that heart shiny. It hurts because there are shards, but they're memories. And you are different, you are changed, as every grief changes one. You are not the same person. So how do we live to be the person that dog thought we were? And that to me is one of their life lessons for us. How do we live to be the one who tries to love unconditionally? We humans can't do that, but we try. How do we learn to forgive? I mean, one of my dogs, she had gunshot pellets in her legs. She had cigarette burns on her neck. She should have hated humans, but she loved us all. She loved everyone she met. So how do we forgive? How do we love? How are we loyal? How are we faithful? How do we live in the moment? How do we suck all that we have in our short lifespan for how many years we have? How can we use that well like our animals do? How do we not hold on to grudges? All of that stuff, they teach us to be better human beings. So that's part of what we have to do. We have to be better human beings because that's what they want us to be. They want us to be like that. And that to me is a real privilege. And it also, I think, if we are really, really careful and really, really attentive, they help us deal with our own mortality. We have a short period of time. They have a shorter lifespan probably than us, but it will run out eventually. So how do we use it well?
And what have you learnt about your mortality through your animals?
Life is short. Life is short. So I try very hard. I am someone who tends to worry a bit, so I try very hard not to because they don't, and to think, now hold on, they live for the person that they love, they want to share that time with them. They want to go on the simple pleasures, going on a walk, going in a car. They don't want much. It's relational. And they teach us it is about relationships. If you see a homeless person with a dog, that dog loves them. They don't judge. They love that person, their essence. So how do we, foster that? How do we make sure that we are lovable but open to things? And that's the other thing with our animals. And if you take a dog for a walk, you know, everything's exciting. Everything, even if they've gone the same way yesterday or even 2 hours ago, it's all new. How do we embrace life like that? And I think that's one of the gifts they are to us. They teach us not only about how to be better human beings, but how to get more out of life.
That is so true. When I think about taking my dog for a walk, it is like every walk is like a new scent, a new smell, a new, new opportunity. And there is a curiosity in which she looks at her daily walk. So I totally understand that. And what role do you think that rituals and memorials play in our life when a pet does die?
I think they're very important. I mean, for some people, they don't want to have anything, and that's perfectly fine. But sometimes and I don't use the word closure because for me, grief and closure, it's almost like there is an end time. I use acceptance rather than closure because that to me is, it's almost like it's got to be a certain time. And that was the other thing with grief. There's no set time, as you well know. Grief is grief, it's lifelong. So when I hear things like closure, when I hear things like complicated grief, it's all complicated. It's no. Unresolved, of course, it's never resolved. So those words, I think we can, well, for me, I throw them out. But acceptance and ritual can be a way of helping not only acceptance, but to remember some of the beautiful memories and to have that, whether with a family or with friends or on your own, a time to take the space to say, this animal was important in my life, is still part of my life. What can I learn from my animal? What were the gifts that I received? And lots of tears, but to be able to embrace that and to say, whether it's, sometimes it'll be a burial, sometimes it'll be cremation, and what feels best for people. But I always say, think about your living arrangements. If you are renting, perhaps burial is not what you want because you will probably move one day. So it's looking long term as well and having to make those decisions too. And I think for children too, to be able to draw a picture, whether to go in the grave or to have and put on the fridge, write a letter, all of those things, I think it's that being able to give something back to the one who you love deeply and who loved you deeply. Yeah.
That's lovely. Tell me, how can, vets, shelters, even funeral professionals support people who are grieving when they lose their pet?
These days, I think vets, I do think, are getting some lectures in their training, but there's plenty of stuff online and books, not only mine, but other books about pet loss. And maybe, I mean, vets are often very scientifically based, and sometimes the emotions can be difficult for them to cope with. In some practices, it might be a particular receptionist or a vet nurse who are seen as the ones who deal more with those emotions. It just depends on the practice, but not to ignore them. And sometimes, a lot of practices will send out a card or make a phone call the next day. Those things are really important because I also think they can make or break a practice. If the client feels cared for, then they'll go back or feel, yes, they've checked on me. And it might be someone who's brought their dog or cat in for the past 12 years. So how do we honour that relationship And how do we care for that client? Not necessarily saying we want the client back. And that's another grief. They may not have another pet because of age or circumstances. And that's another grief that, need to think about as well. But for vets, there's certainly, material online. There's no excuse now to say, I don't understand grief and loss. There's plenty of material. And if they don't feel comfortable with it, to make sure there's someone in the practice who does feel comfortable with it to be able to support clients.
That's something that I had forgotten was we received a card after our cat died, and that was really lovely. You're right. It was also that end of that relationship for that particular point in time.
Mm.
And you don't know at that point whether you'll continue or get another pet. So it is, I had forgotten about that process, that it is another grieving stage that process that you
Mm.
go through in that. How did writing the book and going through collating the letters and thinking about your time at the Lort Smith Animal Hospital, what did you glean from that experience, Barbara?
I mean, I found it therapeutic because my husband died at the beginning of writing it. I mean, I was so pleased that he knew I had a contract for it because he said it's a book you're meant to write. So I felt good about that. And in a sense, it was very, it was so cathartic. I cried all the way through it. At the same time, I was writing a book about extinction. So, next time I might do, a Mills and Boon or something, it's something with a bit of, I thought, death and death. So whether it was pet loss or writing eulogies about extinct animals, it was like, but it was helpful for me, I think. And only as I was rereading it today, I thought, oh, it wasn't too bad. Because I hadn't really gone back to look at it because I thought I would be awful. I don't remember what I was like at that stage except tears. But I did always want to write a book about it to help others. I mean, that's the sole purpose of writing the book, to help others. And I loved my time. I loved my time at Lort Smith. It was so rewarding to meet so many beautiful people, to meet so many beautiful animals. I used to sit in my waiting room and I could hear the animals being called, and one might be called Genesis or Moses or something, or Boris, and you think of this, big animal would be this tiny little chihuahua or something. Like it just, so many funny stories, but beautiful people. And I just felt being able to put some of that in the book and going through the letters and also realizing how significant it was for them, for the human clients, to have someone who cared. And I think that's what I wanted to get across in the book. We can all make a difference. We don't have to be working somewhere to make a difference. We can just, courtesy of being a human, we can help someone breathe a little better that day because we said, is there anything I can do? And I'd reread the letters and just burst into tears because some of them were so moving and so beautiful. And I could see the client and see their animal, and it was a privilege. All of it was privilege. I just felt so, so fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time and had that experience. So, yeah, loved it.
And it's interesting that you say that that period of time you can't really even remember, because that's the whole grieving process, isn't
Mm,
it? That
mm,
brain fog
mm.
that
Yeah.
comes over you. And so tell me, what do you think during that process, and with the fact that your husband had died, was it his death that informed some of the writing, or was it your writing that was a reflective process of your time with the pets? How much do you think is entwined in that process as you were writing?
I think some of it was, I mean, he'd been ill for quite a number of years and going through all the specialists and all of the stuff that I thought if he'd been a dog, we might have done something differently. Like it would have spared him the suffering, etc. So it would have been a different end. But I always remember our dog Harry, who's at my feet still. He's elderly. He's totally blind. Now, when my husband was diagnosed with facial cancer and then brain tumour, he went blind. But he took great heart from Harry because he said, if this dog is totally, and he's very much his dog, and it was like, if he can be happy and can't see anything, I too can be happy and find joy. So that dog had made such a difference in those final years that I will never be able to repay Harry, ever. Even chicken every day, I could never repay him for how he got my husband through that. And that's the thing. Grief is grief upon grief. I mean, to be born means we grieve. We can't go through life without grieving. But if we value that, and I think having worked as a chaplain in aged care for a number of years and nursed before that, I just felt very drawn to that. And knowing that life does have an end point. I mean, there are some commercials on TV that just really upset me because it's, if you use this beauty product, it's almost like, well, you'll cheat death. No, you don't cheat death. So let's realize that, people will say, oh, cancer saved me because I live life differently. And I said, you don't need cancer to live differently. You don't need a terminal illness to live differently. We can live differently by making that choice to live fully and be totally alive and to embrace the things that bring us joy and our families and all of those things. But as you said, that brain fog, I really was quite surprised that the writing was of pretty good quality. Because as I said, I was a bit frightened to reread it, to thinking, what if I went, oh, but I think I just felt it was an important book to write, and the fact that he knew I was going to be writing it gave me that push and that strength to keep going through. And everything to do with grief, it's always I reflect back and say, what I'm doing here, and how is it hard here, and and it's still very messy, still awful, still raw, but that grief is the price of love, and that's the bottom line. And I say to people, you can either love knowing you'll probably eventually grieve, or you can do without the loving and just have a life that isn't as joyful. So it's a choice. And yeah, it's, there's that saying that, dogs will give you your best day of your life, but also one of your worst. And you can say that about anyone in the family. And that's, we go through and we might have a year or two without someone we know who dies, but then you might get 3 or 4 in that year, and it's that treasuring of those friendships and how they have made you the person you are. And that's the thing from pet loss as well. What sort of person has your pet made you be? It might be more patient, might be more accommodating, might be even fitter because you've been out walking. All of those things, they change us, and grief changes us. Yeah.
I'm intrigued to know whether you have a favourite pet or a favourite animal. You have written about pigeons and then pelicans. They're two very diverse and perhaps opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the feathered friends. So,
Yeah.
is there a favourite animal for you?
Well, Goose is coming out soon too. So there you are.
Oh,
I've Goose. Look, the animal books, the pigeon, pelican, and goose are part of what's called an animal series for Reaction Press. So you look at the animal from their biology, but also how they feature in history, in art, in literature. So, and I find all that fascinating. I find, as we talked about Greek myths earlier, how dogs are portrayed or how cats are portrayed. The pelican is a symbol of Christ because there's this myth that during hard times, the pelican would pluck its breast, feed its young on its blood, and die and then resurrect in 3 days. So there's all these interesting myths and legends that are attached to an ordinary creature, but I always say there's no ordinary creature. I mean, a cockroach has 13 chamber hearts, 13 hearts. I mean,
wow.
and I always say, if people get bored, just choose any animal. Doesn't matter what animal. Go and research, and you'll find something interesting. So I think I don't have a favourite. I think if I had to say you can only have one animal, what would it be? I suppose it would be a cat.
That's interesting. Tell me
Maybe.
why did you choose a cat, Barbara?
Well, I think probably at my age, I think in 20 years' time, I might not be, I might trip over a dog and not be able to walk a dog. I don't know. But I've always had dogs and cats, so I don't know. It's just if I had to choose one, I don't have a favourite animal per se. I love every animal. I think they've all got something to contribute. They're all different. They've all got different aspects. And if we just take the time to learn a fact or two about a particular animal, we'll be surprised. We would never be bored. So I think that's and that's one of the reasons I want to try and halt extinction, because once they're gone, they're gone, and we're a poorer planet. And the same with our own animals. We want to hold on to them, make sure they're as healthy as they possibly can because we love them so much.
I love the fact that in your book you actually talk about how Egyptians used to grieve cats as well.
Hmm.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, they used to shave their eyebrows, and to me, it was a way to show people that they were grieving. And in our society, how do we do that now? We don't all dress in black like we used to. And again, how do we do that? But in a sense, it was also perhaps a way, and I don't know for sure, but I did read that it was also a way to say this is a period of mourning until your eyebrows grow back. You're in mourning. So, as we know, many cultures and religions have set periods for mourning or intense mourning. But again, how do we do that as society? How do people know? I mean, for myself, going through widowhood, I think there are all these other broken hearts around, but how do we know? And the same whether it's from our animal family or from our human family, people are nursing broken hearts and we don't know. We go through life, you put on a smile on the dial and just go through, and things trigger it, like music triggers things. Or for pet owners going into a supermarket, you think, I'm not going down the pet aisle, that'll be fine.
Mm.
But there they are, it might be, a display on the corner, because that brand is on special. So how do we help those people when they burst into tears? Or it's all of that. If we all wore black, and not being Melbourne, but in terms of mourning colours, maybe
Yeah,
that would have been a way, but we don't anymore because we don't know.
that is so true, because when I am at a function and people ask me what do I do, and
Mm.
I talk about the work that I do and the podcast, etc., and everyone has a story.
Mm.
That's how the podcast came about, is because everyone I spoke to had a story about someone who had died and what the impact that was. And that could be anyone from a friend to a loved one to a pet. Everyone had a story to share. And so sometimes it would be nice to actually know whether there was an armband or something that identified us all as part of some sort of club. But at the same time, I think you said it before, is that even when we're born, we actually start grieving from that process, because
Mm.
there is always an end point that we will always get to at some point, and that each grief and each loss adds to that mosaic that you're referring to of our heart.
Mm. And change. I mean, grief is change. And, as humans, we don't always like change, but that's part of it, and not to be surprised by it. But there's that saying, I think it's a Buddhist saying that, that you've got a bird on your shoulder and one day it'll say, today's the day. Are we prepared for that? Are we ready? And I think our animals prepare us in some way, because it's that sense of our time will run out one day too. And I mean, I like to think that we will see them again. That's my belief. And I'll have a whole lot there at the pearly gates. I saw a beautiful cartoon that they had St. Peter at the gates, and there's a cat, and he's saying, are you going in or are you going out? And I can tell you, because you're a cat lover, you'll get that. So I love to think that, my cats might still be there thinking, will I go in? Will I go out? Will I go in? Will I go out? And it's a cat door size, gate, which I thought was
And
beautiful.
anyone who is listening who has a cat will totally appreciate that indecision at that particular point in time from a cat.
Exactly. And who's going to be their master now? So, but it's so, that to me is that sense of the afterlife. For me is that, I like to think I will see them again, and that essence lives on in some way. And, but again, it's that sense of, as you said, stories. Everyone has a story. Everyone. You can't go through life without grief and without loss. And it might be something permanent, but it might also be something with change. And that's also a grief. For people with assistance dogs, and, that's another grief. Or people who are having to give up their animals to go into aged care, that's another grief. So there might be different griefs that we might not go through with human loss, but there's so many facets.
Yeah, and something that I thought was obviously quite informed from the work that you do with story dogs, but also that ripple effect of when an animal does die, just those incidental people who
Mm,
may be aware of your pet and their involvement, like you were talking about the people that you at the dog park that know you and may know the dog's name, but it's that ripple effect of when a pet dies, who may be impacted
mm.
by that death as well.
Exactly, and it'll be the students, it'll be the volunteers, it'll be staff, it'll be people involved in with an assistance dog or a deaf dog. But it's also we see people, but we're also not always aware how their animal has helped them in life. So perhaps that dog or that cat has been their reason for getting out of bed, having a routine, having to be well enough to look after them, well enough to go and do the shopping, to provide food for the animals. It might be what gets them out when their partner's died. Yes, I've got this routine. I've got to walk the dog. So we don't really know how dependent some people are on their animals to give them a reason to live as well. I mean, there are some people who say they they are here because of their animals, and they are quite adamant about that. So I think we need to honour our animals and to give them the credit where credit's due, and also to say we don't always know how deep a rift it can be when an animal has died. And as you said, the ripple effect is one thing, but I think sometimes the ones we never see, you think, well, how are they coping without a reason to get out of bed?
That's very true. And what's your hope that people, your readers from the book Broken Heart, Shared Heart, Healing Heart, what do you hope their takeaway is from reading the book?
I hope first of all that they realise their grief is normal, that they're not being over sentimental. And that's one of the things people would say to me, I think I'm being over sentimental, or I shouldn't be crying like this. No, that's perfectly normal. So for them to realise the grief they are experiencing is normal. If they have problems telling people, especially if they perhaps are not sleeping, not eating, need to go to talk to the doctor, sometimes people are reluctant to seek help because they're afraid of people's reactions. And I would say to people, just tell your doctor someone in the family has died. They don't need to know that your family has four legs. So if they're worried how people will react, you're not telling a lie. You're just not giving all the information. You're just saying a family member has died. So for them to realise if they need help, as some people do, it's okay to ask for help. But thirdly, I think for them to realise that the gift that pets are, just in that little package, that they're just so wonderful, and let's appreciate them and let us be better human beings because of them. And then we've lived up to being the person our dog or our cat thinks we are. And that's we're on the pedestal there. And to be like that with other people, if we can be someone's cheerleader, if we can be there to always have an encouraging word, that would be brilliant too. But to say grief is grief. There's no end date, and we grieve because we love, and our hearts are broken, but they're full of beautiful memories. We change forever as a result of that.
That's so beautiful. I will actually have an image of a mosaic heart when I think of this interview and your words, Barbara. Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your insights into a topic that's not really discussed very often and very publicly. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.